Welcome back everyone to the Organic Archery YouTube channel. Today's video is part 3 in the 6-part Art of Arrow Making series. And today I'm going to cover a technique that can be used to make arrows from river cane, bamboo, reeds, and even the common bamboo garden stakes you find at the big box stores. Some type of river cane or bamboo was one of the most widespread arrow making materials in human history. It would have been used throughout Asia and the tropical islands of the East, Central Africa, South America, Mexico, and the southeastern United States. I live about 4 hours drive from the nearest river cane, but the way I stock up is each year I go down to an outdoor skills event in Arkansas, and the land where the event is held is covered in river cane, and the owners have been kind enough to let us cut as much as we want. So with me being so far away from river cane, you guys aren't gonna get any live cutting footage today, but there are plenty of tutorials out there if you wanna see somebody go out into the woods and cut these fresh. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You just go out into a stand of bamboo or river cane and you cut the ones that are the same diameter as the arrows you're trying to make. There's going to be no shortage of materials in a river cane or bamboo stand, so you can get as OCD as you want with it. This bundle here is matched in both diameter and node distance, and then this bundle here is only matched in diameter, and the nodes are kind of all over the place. I tend to gravitate towards making arrows that are matched in diameter and just letting the nodes fall where they may. So one of the obvious pros of this material is it's already pretty much shaped like an arrow. So all we have to do to get these ready is get them dry if you're cutting it fresh, and do a little bit of straightening with some heat. I like to season my river cane for at least 2 months, and that's on the far low end of the spectrum, but it does tend to dry out quite a bit quicker than wood. Everything I have here in the shop has been seasoned for at least 1 to 2 years, just because the volume of river cane I'm bringing in is far more than the number of arrows I'm making, so it all tends to sit around for quite a while before I get around to it. But one thing I would advise against is force drying river cane or bamboo when it's green. These chambers in between the nodes are hollow and they're sealed, and the cane has a bunch of moisture in it when it's green. So if you were to force dry it over, say, a fire, you'll build up a bunch of steam pressure inside of those chambers, and they'll pop and sort of blow the sidewalls of the river cane apart, and it essentially ruins the material. So in my opinion, air dried is always best with river cane and bamboo. That's pretty much it for the intro to this material. It's a pretty straightforward process. So we're gonna get these straight, and then I'll show you guys how to carve nocks in them. And I like to plug the point end with a piece of wood so I can put the industry standard 5-degree taper on them so that they can accommodate all of the commercially available points. Let's get right into it. I grabbed a handful of cane from my stash in the loft, and like I mentioned before, if you guys want to see these harvested in the wild, there are plenty of tutorials out there, but it's a pretty self-explanatory process if you live in a region where bamboo or river cane grows. Some of these are river cane and some are switch cane, but both make fantastic arrows in my experience. And I've got a couple bundles here sorted from smallest diameter on the left to largest diameter on the right. When I'm trying to make a matched set of arrows from river cane or bamboo, I like to match both the diameter and the wall thickness. You can see how much of a difference there is in the wall thickness between these two pieces of river cane, and that's going to have a pretty significant effect on the weight and stiffness of the arrow. And this is just another great example of why you should always harvest more natural materials than you think you'll need for a set of arrows. Here I've got 6 that are matched in diameter and wall thickness, and it's been a little while since I've made a set from river cane, so I've got some spares in the background in case I break any of these during the straightening process. Some people like to match all of the nodes, so they end up with really symmetrical sets, but I'm mostly interested in matching the first node on the nock end of the arrow. What that's going to do is give me one full length of smooth material to attach my fletchings to without having to run the feathers over any of these nodes. My favorite tool for cutting river cane and bamboo is this little pipe cutter, and most hardware stores carry these and they're fairly inexpensive, but you can also just score it all the way around with a pocket knife or cut it with a saw or whatever you have access to, but you can see how nice of a cut this pipe cutter makes without damaging any of the fibers. I've got all 6 of these cut on the nock end and a nice smooth section for applying the feathers later. These are still about 36 inches long, and I'm going to leave them this length for now because it'll make straightening easier. My favorite method for straightening is over a small bed of hot coals, but it is really cold outside today, so I'm just going to use this paint stripping heat gun. And I don't really consider this a luxury tool because most hardware stores carry these for less than 50 bucks. The standard tip on these works just fine, but most of them come with a little pack of accessories, and I like this one that concentrates the heat into a long, narrow strip. Arrow straightening wrenches were made from all kinds of materials throughout history, and it's not really a necessary tool. You can do the whole process freehand, but I like these. This one's just a 45-degree hole drilled through a stick with the edges that will contact the arrow rounded off. If you have any sharp square edges, you could collapse the cane. You simply slide the arrow through once it's warmed up, and the wrench gives you the ability to make concentrated corrections. And yes, it'll be very hot, so if that bothers you, wear some gloves. So my favorite strategy for getting these straight is to do all of the sections in between the nodes first, and then you'll end up with a bunch of slightly zigzagged straight lines, and you can go back after everything's cooled off and align everything with the nodes. But I know some makers like to do it in the opposite order and align the nodes first and then go back to the straight sections, but it all boils down to personal preference, so try both and see which one you like better. The arrow wrench puts a lot of leverage into the equation, so I like to do multiple rounds of smaller adjustments instead of just trying to get it all in one go. If you really crank on this thing, you'll probably just collapse the sidewalls of the arrow. And anytime I'm freehand straightening with just my palm, I like to use a scrap piece of leather or a glove on my straightening hand to keep from getting burned. As the arrow warms up, it'll first turn very glossy, and then right after that, it'll turn to a golden brown color. And anywhere between that gloss and a golden brown is perfect for adjustments. You never want to scorch this thing any farther than light brown, or you'll risk damaging the plant cells and making the arrows brittle. The sections you've already adjusted will stay hot for quite some time, so I like to use the arrow wrench to save my fingers. This is just another angle to show you how little pressure it takes to make an adjustment with an arrow wrench. Now I have all of the internodal sections straight, but the nodes are still out of alignment. Here's a look at all 6 in the same stage of completion. Now comes the tricky part that requires some finesse because the nodes are the weakest link. You definitely don't want to overheat these nodes or they might snap outright, so don't heat them past a golden brown, and remember you can reheat this as many times as you need, so take your time and make smaller adjustments, especially if it requires a major correction. Sometimes they fight ya, and sometimes all it takes is a little correction. And I broke quite a few river cane arrows when I was first learning how to straighten them, so don't get discouraged. As with all things, you'll get better with practice. River cane arrows don't have to look like they were made by a machine. It's okay to have a few little wiggles, and so long as you give straightening an honest effort, you'll get good arrow flight. Now that these are all straight, I trim mine to a length of 32 inches. Since river cane and bamboo arrows are hollow, I like to plug the point end with a little piece of wood. That way I can put the industry standard 5-degree taper on them and use whichever glue-on points I want. It only needs to go about an inch into the arrow, and you'll probably have to shape each one by hand, but it goes pretty quickly. Just make sure they don't fit too tightly or you'll split the arrow. I like mine to be just snug. Here you can see all the plugs are just a little different in size. I like to scrape the waxy outer coating off the area where the fletchings will go. Usually if you try to glue them to this waxy outer layer, they'll start to fall off after just a few shots. Here's a side-by-side comparison with the top one scraped and the bottom one waxy. Next, I like to smooth the nodes just a little bit with some 120 sandpaper, and my goal is not to make them perfectly flat. I'm just taking the sharp edges off so they're not so abrupt. If you sand them too much, you'll compromise the integrity of the arrow. At this stage, they are straightened, plugged on the point end, the nodes are sanded, and the nock end, where the fletching will be applied, has been debarked.
I'm using the same set of tools I used in the previous 2 chapters to carve the nocks. If you guys want to see the detailed tool breakdown and a step-by-step knot carving tutorial, I covered that in chapter 1.
Here's a quick note on the orientation of the nocks right before I cut these. With river cane and bamboo, I really don't think it matters which direction you cut your nocks, but you'll notice they have these alternating leaves that run up the arrow, and they leave these deep divots. And I personally like to cut my nocks parallel to those leaves so that they're facing up and down when they're on the bowstring. That puts these 2 sides that are a little more smooth up against my bow. But again, I really don't think it matters that much.
I know some of you will be curious about the weight, so I'm going to weigh these in the background while I talk about arrow spine. In case you haven't noticed throughout this series, I'm not the biggest advocate for obsessing over spine. I used to have an Ace Spine Master on the wall, but it mostly collected dust. And after a few thousand arrows, you get pretty good at judging the spine by feel. The way I make my bow handles makes them very forgiving of spine, so I really like to get them in the ballpark by feel and then tune them in real time with the bow I intend to pair them with. But if you like spine testers, by all means go for it. I just prefer to do it this way.
That's it for this chapter, guys. As you can see, making arrow shafts from river cane and bamboo is a pretty straightforward process. I ended up with 6 almost perfectly symmetrical arrows with a weight variance of about 60 grains or so. And for natural materials and for reasonable stick bow hunting distances, these are going to work just fine. If you were a competitive target archer, or if you were shooting these outside of say 25 yards, you might notice the heavier ones dropping more than the lighter ones, but I'm not too worried about it. You'll see this set again in chapter 5 when I choose a fletching style for them, and in chapter 6 when I put some points on them. And I know some of you guys are probably ready to see all these arrows fly, but chapter 1 through 4 is just showing you how to gather the raw materials and turn them into arrow shafts. Chapter 5 is going to show you 3 or 4 different fletching styles, and chapter 6 will cover some different point styles with a focus on homemade broadheads. Before I sign off, I wanted to remind you that if you've ever wanted to build your very own primitive longbow from start to finish using only simple hand tools, the Organic Archery bow making workshops are live on my site. Our first class this year is in mid-March, And I think we still have 1 or 2 spots available for that one. But you can view my full course schedule down in the link that I will leave in the description of this video. Over the last few years, we've hosted over 100 students, and not a single person has left here without a bow they can be proud of. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in Chapter 4, where I'm going to show you how to make arrow shafts from hardwood shoots gathered in the wild.